Hello, everyone. I have the pleasure of welcoming you to our space, Senior Planet Exploration Center, for those of you who have never been here before, and also welcoming you to our event, #RaisingHell, 50 Years of Activism. I'm Isabel. I manage our civic engagement and advocacy programming here at Senior Planet, and I'm so grateful to be here. When we were bringing together the concept of this event, we were thinking of names, came up with a whole bunch of names, and from my experience of 1968, I'm so happy that you were paying attention. From the stories that I have heard from 1968, Raising Hell seemed like a very appropriate fit. For those of you who aren't familiar, this symbol, the hashtag, it's used on social media platforms in order to organize and categorize conversations. If you're interested in learning more about that, please join us for our Social Media for Advocacy workshop that we have on Monday. You can get more information about that online, and we can tell you more about it later during the reception. So before we start the panel, I'm going to be happily setting a few intentions for us for the night. The first intention I'd like to set is leading with gratitude, and so to practice, thank you for being here. I'm so grateful for everybody who showed up in this space. I'm so excited that you took the time to be here. In addition, I would love for us all to acknowledge the vulnerability that is required to speak honestly and bravely about our experiences, and to be thankful for that. If not explicitly when we have conversations with one another, then implicitly in the way that we listen to one another. If we're setting the first intention of leading with gratitude, then I'd like the second intention to be following with curiosity. It is so easy to get stuck in generalizations of good-for-nothing millennials and resource-greedy baby boomers, liberal snowflakes, and heartless conservatives. So I'm going to urge us to be curious in our conversations. And if you'll give me a moment to be curious right now, can you raise your hand in the room if you are 60 years and older? Can you raise your hand in the room if you are not? Beautiful. Can you raise your hand if you actively use technology? Can you raise your hand if you are actively involved in creating a world that you want to be a part of? Fantastic. So you'll find on the back of your Raising Hell programs the title Takeaways. And that is a list of questions guiding us in the learning here tonight, but also as you move forward into the world having these conversations. A third intention that I would like to set, we've invited you here to celebrate the past 50 years of activism. And so one beautiful piece of our human experience is our sense of humor, and I'm very excited to experience that tonight. But I would like to challenge us in expanding our definition of celebrating so that it includes the critical analysis necessary to understand what we have done right and what we have not done so well so that we can be better moving forward. Also in that vein, I'd like to set up the evening that we're about to have. Right, so I'm going to pass this microphone off to our panel in just a minute. We have this incredible panel of wonderfully knowledgeable people. You can see their biographies in your program materials. If you're anything like me, I listen to panels and I get very excited. And I think, wow, that's fantastic. What a meaningful thing to say. Or, oh my God, I don't agree with that at all. So I want you to take that passion, because after the panel, during the reception, you'll see around the room we have banners. You'll see this one over here, scorecard. There's one in the back with technology, one over here, lessons, and one over here on aging. These are the general themes of the night, and as you listen to our conversation in the panel, I would invite you to hold on to the thing that you found most meaningful or most urgent. And during the reception, head over to the banner that feels strongest for you, so that we can have the conversations that are important to you. Finally, our last intention, I know that's asking a lot. I want to urge you to take the narratives and the conversations that we're having here, and I want you to put them to action. I need you to put them to action. And I know for some of you, you've been doing this for a bit of time. And so as somebody in a younger generation, I am going to ask that you work with me, that you work with us, and that we continue to create and define a world that we want to live in. And without further ado, I am going to pass the microphone over to our incredible executive director and founder of Senior Planet, Tom Camber.
Thank you, Isabel. So I'm told I should stay seated so I can be part of the camera shot. Is that right? So I want to, first of all, I want to welcome everybody. I really want to thank Isabel, who has been leading this charge. I mean, really honestly, I bet every person in this room is an activist, and as I'm looking around, I'm a little bit intimidated by the number of people who I know personally have been doing this work since I was about 5 years old and have done incredible things. So I feel silly moderating the panel, but I'm going to take a crack at it here. But I do want to say that working with Isabel and the rest of the team at Oates, who are coming up and creating a new wave of this kind of work and are so excited about doing it in an intergenerational context, makes me optimistic. And it really gives me hope for the future. I'm super excited about it. So thank you for doing this and putting it together. And just how well organized it is, and the team on the digital side, and the people who've been doing the outreach, and our amazing volunteers who are here tonight. It's just been incredible. So I could thank people for an hour, but I'll do that later. I do want to say, for those of you, there's a few people here who are not as familiar with Senior Planet. So it's a nonprofit organization, Oates, which runs Senior Planet, which is a membership association now of older adults who come together to learn technology, but to do it for a purpose, to help us all age together and create the world that we want to live in. That's a beautiful phrase, as we age, and to make it a place where we're excited about getting older, and we're excited about doing it as ourselves, so we don't have to be somebody else when we get older. We can have our own shape and our own way of doing it, and a safe place to come where we're not just accepted, but the people are excited to see us walk in the door. And that's what Senior Planet has been for a long time. And I will tell you, there are people here that were here at the very, very, very beginning tonight. Renee's here tonight, and Barbara. And actually before the very beginning, because Muriel Beach here at the panel was one of the activists that I was working with before I started Senior Planet. And I went to her in 2003 and said, I've got this idea to start a nonprofit. And she said, go do it, make it happen. So we've got this people who've been here from the beginning. But when we started Senior Planet, it was originally about technology. It was about getting people to learn technology, and that was a useful thing to do. But by doing something useful, we discovered something even more exciting, which is that it was opening up opportunities for change and opportunities for making a place that was a new kind of place. And so by doing the classes the way we did them, for example, we taught classes that we designed with senior citizens. We sat down with people who were 75 years old and said, what do you want to do, and how do you want to learn this, and how should we teach it? And so the courses turned out to be these very collaborative affairs. And so if you walk into the center here, you'll see, for example, there's no door on the training room. And so for those of you who've taken classes and had somebody barge in and say, what are you guys working on in here? It can be a little disruptive, but it's also a way of being very open and being very collaborative. It's about sparking curiosity and getting people to think about a new way of doing things. We don't lock the computer class in the back of the building and close it with a key and say, you know, hide yourselves while you're learning. We want to be very visible. There's a reason the Senior Planet Center has windows onto the street. We wanted that. We wanted it to be a place where we were in your face learning, and in your face starting businesses, and in your face helping each other, so that it was real visible. And as that's been evolving, we've started taking this activism stuff seriously. And we've been working on it for a few years. Marilyn was a part of an early phase of this and watched me learn how to do it slowly, but I'm getting there. Marianne, sorry, blanking on names. And you know, people have really been supporting us as we're getting better at it, step by step. And finally, we were able to get it to a program level where we brought in a staff person to work full time on this, and we've been teaching classes. But the idea is to say, what's bringing people together here, which is really about learning, and it's really about finding a way to kind of reach your goals and to do it in a group when you can, and to show that sort of supportive, more progressive approach to things where we can make a better world. Why not do it in a way that looks outward, that also thinks about changing the world around us, not just what goes on in these four walls? And so we've been teaching these leadership classes. We've been done it in Queens and in Brooklyn and in the Bronx, all 5 boroughs now. We've got hundreds of people that have been involved in various ways, and we're working to build more of a capacity to make this social change part of our mission real. So tonight, we've come together to do a panel discussion around the legacy of 1968. And the idea here is to spark a conversation about what's possible, get people to learn from each other, to share some ideas. And we are going to be doing another event in January that will be bringing people together to talk about how to actualize this and take the next steps in 2019. So we're looking forward as well as backward. And I can tell you that when I was a teenager, my dad had been active in social change when he was a professor, so we have 2 professors here who can relate to that. And I went to his bookshelf and started reading books about Martin Luther King and Abby Hoffman, and it inspired me to get active. And I started canvassing, doing environmental work when I was about 15 years old. And that led one thing after another to the work that I started doing in New York when I came and went to first college, then graduate school. And I won't make it a secret that one of the reasons I went to New York for graduate school was Frances Fox Piven, who's here with us on the panel. I had been reading her books for years and realized she was teaching and thought, oh my gosh, I could go take classes with this person. She was a star to me and somebody that really inspired me. So as I started working in the field and getting active, I was able to be inspired by 1968, even though I was only 2 years old. And I named my daughter Abigail, partly because her name would be Abby. And I spelled it A-B-B-I-E, because Abby Hoffman spelled his name that way. And I had a copy of Steal This Book, which was stolen from me. And I had a friend who bought me another copy of it, and that one got stolen from me, so apparently they don't stay on your bookshelves. But Abby and I fight every year. We have an argument at least once about whether her name should be A-B-B-I-E or A-B-B-Y, which is how she spells it. So even though I might be a big activist, I can't get my daughter to follow suit yet. So I'm going to switch gears here and introduce our panelists. And we've got a really great conversation to have here. We've got a series of topics to cover, but first I'll do just a quick one sentence. I'm not a person who reads the bios because that gets kind of tedious. These bios are really meaningful, and you've got 4 superstars up here, so do take a moment to read them in full. But Allison Nickerson was supposed to be moderating, but she had a family emergency, so I've gotten pressed into service here. But Charlton, is it McElwain or McElwain? McElwain. McElwain is Vice Provost for Faculty Engagement and Development at NYU, and is a specialist about the intersection of technology and activism and race, and has written a book that's coming out, Black Software, the Internet and Racial Justice, from the Afronet to Black Lives Matter, which I am definitely going to go out and read, so I'm excited about that. Got a new book. And Frances Fox Piven here was a professor at City University of New York. I know her as the author of Poor People's Movements and Regulating the Poor, but she wrote about 50 books more than that, I know, together with Richard Cloward, who was her collaborator and partner for many years. She was my professor in graduate school and a big inspiration when I was going through grad school about how do you think about activism from the perspective of a political scientist. So how can we be more serious about it? And I'm shifting orders here. Gilda Miros is a genuine, has starred in film and theater and television in Mexico, Puerto Rico, and North America, and is a media star with a Latin perspective, which I'm really excited to hear more from. It's my first time meeting her tonight, but she's worked with many of our colleagues here. And Muriel Beach, who's been an inspiration to me, has been an activist since she was, I think, about 5 years old. But Muriel, for example, studied labor economics with Frances Perkins at Cornell. So she was there when Social Security was a baby and studied with helped study with the person who invented so many of the things that we're fighting for, but has been an activist here in New York City on many, many issues from LGBT rights to aging, and is also a bit of a coach for people at Senior Planet to do great work. So this is our distinguished panel. So we've got these 4 topics for tonight. One is the scorecard topic. What's been going? How's it been going since 1968? How we doing? Remember Ed Koch used to ask that question, "How am I doing?" Well, now as a bunch of activists, we should get at that. Some of you might take that question and turn it around on me. Secondly is lessons. We're all in learning mode here. So what lessons did we learn as activists in our careers? Thirdly, technology. What is digital technology? How's the digital age been changing activism? And then finally, because we're so focused on aging, let's talk a bit about aging and about what older adults can do to be at the forefront. So why don't we start here with Charlton on this side. We'll just go across. Take a moment, a few minutes to talk a little bit about your scorecard from 1968. What do you remember, or how did you first get into this kind of thing? And what did 1968 teach you? Where did you think we would be if looking in that context?
Thank you, and thank you for coming and for inviting me out here. I will start, I guess, and say that my scorecard begins at 0 in terms of remembering 1968. Closer? That good? All right. So my experience has much more to do with looking back from where I am today and looking back on the movements of the 60s, of 68 in particular, and trying to understand both for myself but also to help my students understand the lessons learned from that time period. And so as I look back and think about a scorecard, I think one of the things that reminds me or hits me most is thinking about how so little seems to have changed between now and then when we think about many of the same issues that we're facing and dealing with every day today, whether that's about civil rights and racial justice, whether that's about gender inequality, about sexual violence, about many of these issues that many of you were fighting for in many different ways 50 years ago, that we are still fighting them in sometimes in different instantiations, in some ways in ways that look very much the same than they did. And so from my vantage point, things are better in many ways, but I say we're probably not doing as well as I would have hoped things would have been after this long period of time.
I was there. In 1968, I had been working with. Oh, now you can.
There you go.
In 1968, I had been working with tenant groups on the Lower East Side who were fighting sort of heat and hot water campaigns, trying to get the landlord to heat the buildings and to make basic repairs. And in the course of that work, I also became involved with local groups of welfare moms who, the welfare system was terrible at that time. it got better as a result of the activism of the welfare rights movement. Now it's worse again. So there was a lot of activism around poverty, around racial injustice. I think it's pretty accurate to say that 1968 saw the peaking of the Black freedom movement that really did change the United States, really changed our country for the better. And of course, 1968 was also a peak year of the anti-war movement, and the war in Vietnam hung like a pall over everything that anybody tried to do, because it was, of course, sucking up so much of our wealth as well as our young people. So 1968, I consider it a great year, because I think social activism is great for our society. It improves us, and it improves the conditions under which we live. And I also think it's always a memorable experience. It makes life really meaningful, really rich. You develop great companions, and, you know, punching the guys that are doing so much harm is fun. So, now, there have been other moments in American history that also have been peak moments of activism, and that also improved our society, other great movements that improved our society. But I think that maybe we're seeing the unfolding of such a period now. Now, it should be said that terrible things are goading that movement into existence. Terrible conditions, untrammeled neoliberal policies which have made the United States more unequal than it was even in the 1920s, and more unequal than any country in the world. A system of incarceration that is sucking up and destroying the lives of young Black and Hispanic men, but also women, but mainly men, destroying communities. A coarsening of our political dialogue. My God, this mad king who is our president, nobody has ever seen anything like this. And what the lies he tells, the peccadillos that he throws in front of the American people as if it's appropriate for our leaders to carry on in that way. But you know, it's not just fun and games. It's not just the circus-like quality of our political life. They also, because it's not just this jerk, they also are doing great damage to American political institutions. Now, I'm not a Pollyanna-ish about American political institutions. I don't think they were anywhere near perfect, but they're being destroyed by the people that are in charge now. It's not Donald Trump alone, it's also the right-wing Republicans who have rallied to him so they can get their measures through the Congress. They'll just eat it all up as quick as they can because they're afraid somebody's coming after them. So I think we have to go after them.
Thank you. First, I want to thank God that I'm able to be here still. And I want to thank Tom for his life, what he's done for Senior Planet. Isabel, gracias. Thank you for the invitation. It's a special moment. Unexpected for me, but I treasure it because I'm able to share some of my happiness. I feel blessed. 80 years old and blessed. Because I get up every morning with energy, with dreams, and that is being blessed. I want to thank Joan Jeffrey from the Actors Fund Performing Arts Legacy Project. She is preserving the history of our performers. When many have passed away and no one knew about their work, about their story, about their trials and tribulations, she's putting it together for the Actors Fund for the world to see. And you will hear a lot about her website. So Joan, thank you very much. I want to thank the Actors Fund and Tracy DeGesu because I am part of a group of older adults that are very active with the Actors Fund. I want to thank Manhattan Neighborhood Network, where I went to, when I was 77, went to study the new technology, and I was able to do a documentary with my iPhone and my iPad. And that documentary has brought me here. I think it's called Seniors Finally Say #MeToo. It's about people that have been men and women in the performing arts, have suffered harassment, never spoke out, and they finally had the guts to do it on video. So that makes me very happy. I remember 68. I went to Vietnam, did a documentary about Latinos that were at war in Saigon, Cam Bay, wherever. I went to the jails to interview Latinos and how they were treated. They had no reading material, no one to speak their language. And I'm sad that today, where are the Latinos here? Where are they? Gracias. Gracias. I want, and it brings me back to Seniors Finally Say #MeToo. I was a producer and the director and the editor, but I was not on camera talking about my own harassment because I'm a Latina. And we think about, maybe we shouldn't say that. We were taught that our culture, you shouldn't say things like that. Ladies, virgins don't say that. So I want to be an activist still. It's not past, it's present. We have a lot to do. When we get up, we're activists. We go out and we make a difference in this world. And that's what it's about. Thank you.
I remember 68. Even though it's 50 years ago, it's like yesterday. In April, the assassination of Martin Luther King. And then in June 6th, our own Bobby Kennedy was killed. But the greatest lesson of 68 was, even though we lost our leaders, we still fought on. There were people who organized, and the grassroots really came up. And we realized that we might be leaderless, but we were a force, a very important force. We could lose our leaders and still fight on. And it was a fight. 68 was a very difficult year. 50 years ago, and in many ways, it's like yesterday. The tears we shed, the despair we felt, and then we picked ourselves up and organized and fought on. I think that's when I first realized what could really be accomplished by grassroots. That when you had a base force that felt a need to correct a difficult situation, we could organize, we could fight it, we could improve the life, and we did. 68 was a sad year, and yet a very powerful year. We were empowered to organize in spite of losing our great leaders, Martin Luther King to the blacks, Bobby Kennedy to us here in New York. But there was work to be done, and we had to do it. And we did it. It was the year when there was a great division, a polarity in this country. And many of the positions that we took were unpopular. But we knew they were right, so we stuck with them. 68 taught us what we could do when we organized, when we worked together, when we cooperated, and when we realized that what we had to do was more important than the things that wanted to take us away from it. I'm proud of what I did in 68. I'm proud of the people I worked with in 68. And I think there's a lot that we here in 2018, almost 2019, can learn from what was done and the way it was done in 1968. Believe me, we were unpopular, but right. And that fortified us to do what we had to do. I look at you today, and I hope that you will be inspired by this group today to realize there is much that you can do on a one-to-one basis, that one person can make a difference. One person united with another person makes even greater difference. And there was great work to be done today. And I challenge you to go out there and do it. The country needs it. Your fellow man needs it. Certainly, the climate needs all the work we can do to save this planet. We're facing very difficult times. And if you can learn from those who led in 68 and how they did it, and go forth today doing what I know is got to be done, and you're the ones who are going to have to do it. My day is past, I think, from being active, reactive, a voice, yes, but there is so much that has to be done today, and it has to be done by you recognizing what has, that without you doing it, nobody's going to do it. You know, there's not a magic genie out there that's going to change things. It's hard work, dedication, tears sometimes, disappointments, failures, and you learn from your failures. But believe me, and I think Thomas here and Senior Planet are a great way of organizing and seeing that this work, which is vital, gets done. Thank you.
So next, I just want to kind of zero in on this learning piece of the puzzle. We're going to do a kind of a quick run through here, but I want to have people just take 1, maybe 2 minutes max, and pick a moment where you felt like you learned something as an activist. What sparked that? What did you learn?
I think I'd have to say, particularly being in the profession I'm in, where Tom and I had a discussion right before this about defining oneself as an activist, defining oneself as an activist and a academic and a professor. And I think one of the things learning early on for me was being comfortable being an academic and knowing that the lesson from history is that academics have had a lot to do with activism, as we see here in this room, and trying to understand the power and responsibility of being in a place of influence, particularly with young minds, young people that we often see as the vanguards for making change in a next generation.
Fran, what did you learn?
I'm going to take your question very literally, Tom.
Yep. Oh, it's okay. Just as long as the mic is, just put it right up there. Yep.
Okay.
Is it off?
It's red, so it was off.
Oh, turn it to green.
Yeah, okay. Try.
Oh, switch mics. Give me that one. Here,
All right, how is this? Okay.
I'll check it.
Well, there was a moment in 1968 that I think made me much more tolerant and much more appreciative of the young, because in 1968 was a long time ago, but even then I wasn't a kid. So, but I had been working with the group in the Kennedy administration that were trying to create the poverty program. And that took me to Washington. I left my daughter, who was a little girl, with a babysitter, and I came back on a Saturday. I came back to New York. And when I got back, it turned out that the students at Columbia, basically STS, the anti-war group, had occupied 5 buildings. And I said to my daughter, because, I wanted to be with her. I had been away a couple of days. I said, you want to go up and see what's going on in campus? And yeah, she was game. So we went to the campus. We didn't live far away from campus. And, I saw all the faculty, the liberal faculty, who were supportive of the students, huddled together in the philosophy building, and they were very histrionic. They were very dramatic about this moment was giving them a place in history, blah, blah, blah. And that made them hug me. And my daughter hated it when men hugged me. So I said, we'll go to the math building, because I had heard that Tom Hayden, who I knew from SDS, was in the math building. I said, we'll go look at the math building. So we went up to the math building, and Tom Hayden and a guy named John Kiffner, who worked for the New York Times, were hanging out the windows, and they yelled, hey, Fran, do you want to come up? This is the occupied building. I was an untenured assistant professor, and I climbed right up and hoisted my daughter up and hung around with the kids for a while. My daughter loved it because she stuck her head out the window on Broadway and somebody threw an egg at her. And the first aid apparatus was summoned into motion to deal with the broken egg on her face. Anyway, the students said that they had 6 demands, and they wanted the faculty to back their 6 demands. One of the demands had to do with the gym being built in Morningside Park, and actually Columbia was doing more for the neighborhood than it ever had, because this neighborhood was going to get to enter at the basement level, I think. But the students weren't particularly sensitive to that fact. and they wanted the elimination of the affiliation of Columbia with the Institute for Defense Analysis, and they wanted a guarantee that none of the students who were involved in the organizing would be punished in any way. Anyway, it added up to 6 demands. So I was sort of a little unsympathetic because none of the demands had to do with the issues that I worked on, having to do with income and housing for very poor people and things like that. The gym, no, that wasn't my issue. But I like to be cooperative, and I did take their 6 demands to the faculty, where I got nobody to support them. But I thought about that a lot, and I thought about, on the one hand, I didn't think those were the smartest and most strategic demands. On the other hand, I also thought that what the students were doing was, in a way, wonderful, just wonderful, courageous, bold. They were very good at communicating, and that deserved to be appreciated, even if you wanted to be finicky about the demands. And that taught me something, I think. It taught me something maybe about the glory of direct action, of movements. And it also taught me something about trying to get into somebody else's space and somebody else's head before you correct and criticize.
Excellent. Thank you. Before I was a broadcaster in Spanish radio, TV, I was a film actress in theater, whatever. I went to an interview at the top Spanish station, radio station in New York City. They wanted to interview me, so I went. And when I went into the studio, I bumped into the owner, and I said to the owner, I wonder if I can have a moment to speak to you. He says, make an appointment. Okay. So I went to the interview, and before I finished, the program director says, the owner wants to speak to you, wants to know what you want to talk to him about. Well, he told me to call. No, he wants to speak to you now. Okay, I went. He said, what is it? What's on your mind? I said, well, listen, you're the top Spanish radio station, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, but you have no Latinas on. You don't have a female announcer or staff announcer working for you. Oh, and you don't, and I said, excuse me, and you don't have any female program or anything geared towards the female audience. Oh, yes, we do. It's called Mujer, which is woman. I said, really? Who does it? A man? Okay. I said, well, thank you very much. And I left. The next day, I got a call from the program director, and he says, Mr. Laverne wants to know if you're interested in co-hosting Mujer. I said, well, I'll get back to you, but you have to start next week. Okay. I spoke to my mother. I had 2 little boys. I was a single mom. And I was doing well, performing, but I said, Mom, I have an offer to do radio, and what do you think? She says, do it. Be an activist. And people said to me, oh, radio, they're going to kick you out. You're going to be there 1 week, and then they're going to throw you out. I mean, it's very unstable. Who wants to do radio? But you know what? I accepted, and I was the first staff announcer in a top Spanish radio station in New York. And I made changes. I had to work like the guys. They said, just because you're a woman, you're not going to get away with anything. You have to do news and spin records and do commercials and do everything. I did it at any shift they gave me. And then I changed the formats to help women in general. That's the story.
One thing about 68 that exists today is the polarization in this country, the extremes in beliefs and programs, etc. And I think the lesson we have to learn from 68 is that even if you're in the minority, if you know you're right, you must keep working. We were in the minority in many of the things that we believed in and were working for in 68. There was a huge anti-war, pro-war movement going on at the same time, and we were very much aware of a class system that existed in America. We didn't always want to say, oh, yes, we have a class system, but we certainly did. But in 68, there was a real earthquake, a shift, and the support started to move in the right direction. It took time, it took a lot of painful work. The difference between then and today is truly the internet. We did not have the means of active, immediate communication that you have today. This is your greatest asset and should be fully utilized. We saw it in that young girl from Florida who organized that March on Washington through the internet. A 17-year-old girl had millions of people marching on Washington. What was it, 2 years ago now? All organized through the internet.
You'll put the mic a little closer to your mouth. There, it's better.
Okay, I'm sorry. So you have an asset today that we did not have then, a means of massive, immediate communication. I think that's the biggest difference between 68 and 2018. Thomas?
That's perfect. Well, that's a perfect segue into our. We're going to do Q&A in about 10 minutes. So I got you there. You can go first if you want, but hold the question. Write it down. We're gonna gallop through here on the digital age here. So that's a perfect segue. How has technology changed activism? This is right down the middle of the plate for Charlton.
It is, and you've already said it. I think it is about speed. It's about scale, and imagining what things might have been like in '68 if you had a medium like the internet, where you could gather people that you had no prior connection to, that you had not organized around, but who had an affinity for the cause for which you were fighting. And so this is, I think, the greatest asset of today's technology, to be able to organize in ways that don't require the type of investment of physically occupying a space, of gathering people together. And while I think that all those things are critically important, I think it is something that today's digital medium really offers activism. In the work that I've done that's really been around racial justice activism, around the emergence of Black Lives Matter, many activists that I talked to in the course of that work always wanted to say, don't mistake the technology for the movement. And I think that is very important. On the other hand, I often wanted to challenge them and push back to say, clearly, you could not have done what you've accomplished with the technology of a different age. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly 50 years ago. And so I think that what we have to offer today is great in terms of technology. I think that we have to find a balance to be able to understand what activism means in today's digital age.
You want to add a couple thoughts, Fran?
Yeah, I have a mixed opinion about the impact of technology, by which everybody means the internet, on activism, social movement organizing. Some of the tasks of organizing are much reduced. They're much easier because of the internet. With just a click of my computer, I can reach a lot of people who earlier I would have had to either telephone or knock on their doors. And that's efficient. That's definitely efficient. On the other hand, I'm not sure about the impact on activism of the fact that everybody's face is buried in a screen all the time. I mean, I don't think...
Microphone.
The mic. Well, I can't gesture with the mic. I
Technology's
have to
getting in your
gesture when
way.
I speak. I'm talking about the fact that everybody is looking at a screen all the time. And the amount of actually, face-to-face connectedness that is being built has to be reduced as a consequence. Maybe that has implications for the kind of solidarity that's possible in a social movement. I said I'm not sure, but it's not all good.
Well, I'm in love with the technology. Besides doing the iPhone and the iPad show that I do every 2 weeks for Manhattan Neighborhood Network, now I'm working on a podcast with just audio, which is radio. It's radio again, but online. That's what the podcast is. But you could use it to teach people, to unite people, to show compassion and love and history. It's like money. People say money's no good. Well, you could use money to do a lot of good things. Not the money, but you do with the money. So I feel she's right in part that we've lost this maybe connection, eye to eye, but you could still reach a lot of young people. I believe in the young people. And they're always tuned, always listening, but you can teach them in that way to be better, to make a better life, to make a better world. And they will listen. If you entertain them, you have to teach and entertain. That is the winning mixture. And I'm happy to be living this now. So that's about it. Thank you.
I think that intergenerational approach is vital for us. And if you realize that most seniors do not go out at night, when night is the time that the younger generation is available, when they're not in school or working, it is through the internet that you can connect them, where often you cannot have that one-to-one meeting with them. One-to-one is always more desirable because the communication is more open back and forth, but it's not always possible. We have to utilize what we do have available. Use if it's a telephone, if it's the iPad, if it's Facebook, whatever, to communicate. And it's only with this communication that we're going to solidify a movement. And there are many different ways of communicating, and I think we have to use all of them to the fullest extent and recognize that some are more available to some people. As some of you may know, I am now legally blind, so reading is very difficult for me, but I can still see on my iPad. and I can hear on a phone and or participate in a meeting like this. But there are other avenues that are closed to me now. I cannot read communications in most things. I can only read on my iPad when I can make the letters very big and hold my iPad practically to my face. But I am open to communicate, to be communicated to, or to communicate to others. And this is what I think all of us have to be, is open for this communication, the exchange of ideas, the building of your idea on a basis of what someone else has told you, and then their exchange back to you. We do not grow in isolation. We expand our knowledge by interrelating with one another in any way and every way we can.
Amen to that.
Thank you.
I want to add the audiobooks.
Yes.
I have a couple of audiobooks. I've written books which I then converted to ebook, that I converted to audiobook. And what she's saying is another vehicle to reach people that cannot see.
That's great.
That's
I've
it.
actually taken Muriel's audiobooks and dropped them in the mail for her. So you're preaching to the converted over here. And then the last point here, this, to kind of, before we go to the questions, is about older adults. How do you see the role of older adults in making change? How can seniors, older adults be at the forefront of change going forward from here? Charlton's like, do I have to talk about this? You can pass it. Or you can have
I think I will. I'll pass it on. Yes, indeed.
Well, that was the question I thought about when you asked me to come here, Tom. And I think that, social movements, especially protest movements, require a lot of energy, and they require a lot of physical stamina. People are on the street. Sometimes you have to run. And those are activities that are easier for younger people. And I think we ought to confront that. That's true. We're not as good at the barricades as young people are. But there are certain kinds of things that we can do for the movement, precisely because we're older. We have a kind of heft, a kind of sobriety, a kind of dignity, a kind of respect, because we're seniors. And I think we ought to bring that and dedicate it to the movements for social justice and the movements to reduce inequality in the United States and in the world. That's a very important contribution. We can also do other things. We can talk, we can write, we can give money, but I think the respect that we can lend to the protest movements is our most important contribution.
Amazing.
I enjoy my age. I think it's a liberation. You're not worried about the wrinkles or am I sexy enough or does he like me? Is he going to get me out? No. You enjoy your learning, your life, what you've done. You could look back and say, hey, look what I did with this. No man is an island, darling. We need each other, no matter how old you are. And the young people, Joan is using in her Performing Arts Legacy project, young performers working with the older performers. And they learn from each other. And that's the way it should be. Thank you.
What about you, Muriel? How should older adults be at the forefront here? I can't believe I'm asking you this question, but you're on. How should older adults be at the forefront of change? And speak into the microphone.
I was thinking, that's why the mic was not near my mouth.
All right, I'll be quiet.
I think older adults have those years of experience, the things that have tried and worked and the things that have tried and failed. That way they can advise younger people. They also have to present themselves in a way that younger people want to listen to them. That is, I think, the key. That with some people, older people, present themselves in a way that they alienate the younger people. And you must recognize that they have different views. They've had a different life, a different exposure than you have. And I find it challenging to listen to them and to learn from them because they think different than I think. And it is necessary for me to be open to them, to let them stimulate my mind to think, oh, there are 5 doorways here. I went through one, but there are 4 other doorways. They're just as good, taking to different areas. And recognizing that there is different selections for priorities for different people. You made a remark before that I wanted to comment on, responsibility. And I think that is a key to something that we seniors have, a responsibility to teach, a responsibility to have open ears, to listen. And only when you listen can you truly communicate.
I'm sitting here thinking we should transcribe this and make it into a manifesto. It's good stuff. We are ready for some questions from the audience. So I wanted to turn it over to people. And you got to the front of the line with your hand up before. So please, what's your question? And we're going to give you a microphone.
It's not really a question. And I'd like just maybe 2 minutes to express myself. Growing up as a boomer and in the love and freedom movement, I've seen a lot of change.
Can I just ask your name?
Gail Mitchell.
Go ahead. Okay.
And I've seen the change, and I've seen a lot of the boomers who spoke about love and protested all involved in the government now and the corruption. And I see this as a time when each of us as individuals has to look within and raise our own consciousness and awareness about humanity and love for ourselves and love for our fellow men and for the planet and for the animals. And to also go about this not with a combative energy, but an openness to attract the things we really want in our life. And I got to see on this last election how really divided the country is. You know, you live in a big city, and you don't go to middle America, and you don't really know all the anger and the hate and all the caca that goes on. So the consciousness also shifts power and empowers us as individuals as well as in groups. And it's important to embrace this humanity. With the technology, I think a lot of people are lost. A lot of people don't know how to communicate anymore. And we're not taught love, we're not taught anything in school and in programs. It's always about competitiveness and goal setting, and we're all sunk into consumerism and letting it rule our lives, as well as these people that are in political position. And we have to take it from a coming together, not only to rally in activism in the groups, but also to connect with one another, to really honor each person and who we are. We're all brothers and sisters on this planet. And we're making it up as we go along now, and we will be making it up as we age in place gracefully.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Gail.
I just very
yep,
quickly want to recognize Charlton for his participation. It's 5:25.
He's got to run, right?
He has a familial responsibility, and so thank you so much, Charlton, for being present.
Does that mean I should scoot over to the couch? Thank you, Charlton. Let me jump to the back here, and then I'll come over here. Bobby, another inspiration of mine. While she's getting the microphone, I'll say that Bobby's organized tens of thousands of seniors to make change in New York City. And when I started Oates, she was one of the people who taught me how to make this stuff happen, and was a real hero for me.
Thank you, and she aged into her own world. Does anyone, folks up front, but maybe even anyone in the room, because I think Oates probably works on this, what are some specific ideas of how to do intergenerational activism? Because, how do we bring people together? How do we sustain something? What will that take? Or if you have ideas. Thank you.
I mean, I can take a quick stab at a piece of that. We did an interesting project a few years ago, which was, we did a couple of intergenerational activist programs at Oates, and they weren't very satisfying. And then we came up with this model around media literacy, around understanding the images of older adults and of young people as well in television commercials and film and any kind of online media. And we brought together groups of seniors with groups of high school students. I think you may have participated in this, Alston, right? Yeah, and we got people in workshops to look at these videos and then to discuss what they thought was going on, and then they re-recorded the videos with their own commentary. So you got the seniors and the kids together saying, like, what is this really saying? And what does it mean to me that someone is trying to sell a product while they're humiliating a person for their age, whether it's because they're too young or too old? And I remember Born Allah, we did a big event at the Museum of the Moving Image in Queens. There were about 100 people in the audience, and he stood up and talked about how he realized that he could make a difference by sharing, by pushing back about those messages, the ageist messages in the media. And they went around the city, Alston was part of this, and did workshops with young people in schools and talked at senior centers around what these messages are and how we can fight back against them. That was actually the beginning of some of the work that we did with the Activate program, which last week here at the center was recording a video, a PSA about ageism here that we're going to run on the local cable channels. So there's some continuity there. I think getting young people and old people together in the same room to tackle any issue. It doesn't have to be just media literacy. It can be transportation access. It can be the social justice things that Fran's talking about, where we're talking about poverty. But throw people out a challenge and let them work on it across the ages with some actual structure. People come up with some pretty cool solutions, and we're happy to host more of that if people want to bring it here. This room's open, and we love to have it.
I would love to speak to you more about that.
Yeah. Isabel's the person to talk to. You've been very patient over in the corner here. Well, I didn't say you are patient, I say you were patient.
I want to say, as an activist, when I cannot hear the speakers, I'm going to make a fuss. Two things I'd like to talk about. The one group, not the young group and not us, but our adult children. Nobody is reaching out to them and saying, how are you doing with the needs of your older parents? We are a tsunami. And we're going to shut down the city if there are not enough services for us. And we need to reach out to them and the businesses. Yep. The other thing is, how do you do something about a terrible problem that everybody says, including Corey Johnson, please stop bringing it up. And that's the problem of the bicycles. They will not address it. There's 30,000 bicycles in New York City every day. And we are put at terrible risk. And I'm just waiting to end up in the hospital. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
Thank you.
You guys want to weigh in on that one?
I do.
Fran's going to jump in on this one.
She's right about the bicycles. I just got back from Amsterdam, and let me tell you, it's going to get much worse unless you put a stop to it. Amsterdam doesn't have big automobile traffic, but the bicycles have taken over the place, and they're tangles, sort of edifices of bicycles parked in front of every building. So you got to do something about the bikes. Can I interject
Yes.
an answer to the question, well, what can we do? Because I think we ought to do things to defend the well-being of older people. And the opportunity is coming when McConnell goes after Social Security and Medicare. It's going to be our big opportunity to show the power of seniors. However, I think we should do something for other people, too, that reflect our values. There is a standoff unfolding at the southern border of the United States, reflecting the xenophobia, the sort of the white nationalism of this administration. They don't want Hispanic immigrants, including babies and children, in the United States. They want to demonize them. I think some church people have gone to the border to try to show a different side of our country and a different set of values. I think, why can't seniors go to the border too and express a kind of welcome? Just this, nothing radical, just the sentiments of the Statue of Liberty. That's all we're talking about. We're talking about old American values, and we ought to express them.
Great. Let's see here. How about you in the front? Yeah.
I have a loud voice, but if you want...
No, you got to use the mic because we're live streaming.
I wanted to build on what you just said because I so appreciate that. I went to a training just the other day to help immigrants in our country. It's Save Sanctuary Coalition. Free training, and what they want, and 90% of the people there were senior citizens. It was so wonderful to see. People going to the border, but you don't have to only go to the border. You can just accompany, and we do it in groups, accompany people to their hearings here in New York. And what it's basically saying is, we have your back, we care. It makes such a difference. So talk about what seniors can do, very simple, and yet all the difference in the world. So I encourage you to please look at that. It makes a big difference.
So we're going to do...
Thank you so much.
We got one more question.
So
is
we're
that
going to
right?
take one more question before...
So we have one more question, and then we have a special commentator that's going to give a few remarks that you're going to find interesting. And then we are going to drink wine and talk some more, so don't feel like you're not going to get a chance. But go ahead. Do you want to do, Bobby, you want to go?
Hi, Bobby Lee. So, as many of us here, we've gone through our lives and we've done many things. So I'd just like to reflect upon, I was fighting for licensure for laboratory personnel. And a man came up to me, who I did not know, could not recognize. He said, "You spoke at Jamaica Hospital." And I thought back and I said, wow, that was 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And I'm just giving you that story to tell you that each and every one of us here can make a difference in this world if you make a choice and go and do something. Because here's somebody who came up to me who I did not know and told me that thank you for something that I did 30 years ago. So if you haven't done it, go do something. Just one thing. Just imagine if everybody did one thing, how amazing that would be.
Perfect.
Thank you. So I would love to call our special guest. We're very excited to have her in attendance, Ashton Applewhite. If you would please join us on the couch. Take a seat.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to Senior Planet. I have received so much support from you all over the years. And speaking about ageism, I am an activist.
Can I give you 1 minute of intro?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
not everybody here has read your book.
Okay. I'll forgive you.
We met Ashton about 10 years ago. She has been, before I knew anything about ageism. Ashton was blogging about ageism. She had she was building a movement of people interested in fighting ageism. And I remember she said she was going to fill the Great Hall at Cooper Union for a lecture on ageism a bunch of years ago. And I thought, oh, she's never going to do that. And she sold it out. And it was an amazing thing that led to her writing a book called This Chair Rocks, which is a manifesto against ageism that I literally give out to people as holiday presents. It is really, really an amazing piece of work. She's got a TED Talk. But I really wanted her here to say a few words and just give a kind of a recap. So she's our surprise special guest.
I am acutely aware that I stand between you all and the food and the alcohol, so I will not go long. I got everyone to come by sending out an email, which I did say, I said if I've ever, also it was free, so people didn't have to pay for it. But I said if I have ever shown up for you, ever, for anything, now is the time to show up for me, because I had no reputation or anything. So you can't play that card too often, but you can play it at least once. I'm going to just sort of go down the questions that everyone dealt with briefly. Are we following through on the promise of 1968 or not? Well, I was 16. We lived in D.C., and all these college kids were staying at our house and marching. So I marched with them, but mainly because I was sort of dewy-eyed over these handsome, hippie college boys. But I have been marching since 1968, that's for sure. And unlike Charles, now he's left and can't defend himself, I would say we are making progress, especially around gay rights, especially when you consider what a Puritan, squeamish culture this is. So I think there's that. And I think we also need to remember that people do not give up power without a struggle. And we have this privileged, largely male, largely white, patriarchy hanging on. And they are hanging on because they know that the tides are turned against them. So I urge us to use that to give us courage and optimism. How can older adults be at the forefront of social change? Well, I would say, why the forefront? I feel that just as it's important to remember that ageism also affects younger people, it's really important to avoid this idea that we older people are the repositories of wisdom or in any way superior, and that we are strong, that all these exchanges are two-way ones. We know from workforce and creative endeavors that mixed age groups are more effective and that there are all kinds of natural synergies. We may not want to be up front at the barricades, but sometimes I think we should be up front there if we're willing to put our bodies on the line, and I haven't done it. I mean, I've done it a little bit, but it's scary, so it's not right for everybody. We all have to do what we're going to do, but I think there are lots of ways. I mean, demonstrations are one place where you see all ages together, and it feels fantastic, right? And I think it feels fantastic for everyone. Technology, as Charles said, how has the digital age influenced things? As he said about Black Lives Matter, I would be nowhere without the internet. I have no credentials. I had no platform. I just started blogging and thinking out loud. So I couldn't be anywhere without social media. I don't think it's great that people have their hands buried in their cell phones, heads buried in their cell phones, but I think that's a broader problem. I think, Muriel is right. We have these amazing tools. We need to use them all. I said, and Francis had a great phrase here, the glory of direct action. And I think we have figured out the movement against ageism's first direct action. And if you will just make sure I have your email, I will send you an email about it. But I don't know if any of you know about, it's sometimes called the 100th day of school day, but it's devolved into dress like a 100-year-old. I know, it's a thing where kindergartners come to school in wearing little fake walkers and fake wigs and all this stuff, and it's really just reinforcing the most negative possible ageist stereotypes. So we want to turn this into the first direct action against ageism by proposing a whole bunch of different ways that kids can celebrate centenarians and what 100 means and not reinforce ageist stereotypes. So if you're a grandparent, a parent, a teacher, know a parent, know a grandparent, know a 5-year-old, here's your chance to take part of it. Sorry, that's the only plugging I'll do. So are we down to the conclusions? I guess, the really obvious one is that nothing is binary. I mean, are we better off or worse off than 1968? We're better off in some ways and worse off than in others. Certainly with technology, you know, this is a massive toolbox available to us, and I think instead of feeling badly, okay, this is embarrassing. I do have an Instagram account, but I pay someone to post and on it for me because I just can't, I've never confessed that, at least not to a large group, but I can't manage another digital mouth. So, but instead of beating myself up over that, you know, pick the thing that you're good at and use that, and don't feel bad that you're not an expert. Hello, Alston. That you're not, you know, good at all these things, because none of us are, whether you're 16 or 116. None of us are good at all the things. So let's not beat ourselves up about that. As Gilda pointed out, there are very few Latinx people here. We need to do better. The thought that haunts me is that I want the movement against ageism to avoid the mistakes of the women's movement, which was to avoid the issues faced by people of color that provoked a schism that haunts it to this day. It did give rise to the term intersectionality, which I will define just in case you all don't know it. I will say that every millennial activist grew up on it, which is a fantastic thing for a reason I'll explain. Intersectionality is the idea that all these different forms of oppression intersect and reinforce each other. So women face issues that men do not. Black women, in turn, face issues that white women do not. And that schism in the women's movement is what gave rise to this really important idea. So I am very excited by the fact that younger activists today understand that the world is getting more diverse, that inclusion is paramount, that I think that saying that hitching age to that sled, if you will, is a smaller ask than saying 60 years ago a woman could run a Fortune 500 company. I think that this knowledge, which is so fantastic, is closer to contemporary knowledge and awareness across all social groups. So I think there's real momentum. You know, I think the tide is going to turn because I have to believe that. That's a crappy reason, but it's my number one reason. And I think that this momentum is a legitimate evidence-based reason for my optimism. I noticed that one other besides the racial divide, which is a tough one, class is the hardest of all. I am bound and determined to look at the intersection between ageism and ableism, which no one wants to go anywhere near for complicated reasons that I'll go into when I'm not between you and the cocktails. But what's interesting to me is that the activists doing the really interesting stuff in almost every field, from ableism to indigenous rights to definitely Black Lives Matter, are young, queer women of color. Almost all of them, I have some theories as to why, but I'd love to hear it from anyone else. But here's the thing, age is not yet on their radar. They're intersectional up the wazoo on rights for every possible group you can imagine. But I know when I find them and I say to them, what about age? They're not gonna say, oh, we don't want any old people. They're going to find solidarity with us. No one, you know, I ask people, what do you think of as criteria for diversity? Very few people say age, but when I say how about age, no one says that's a dumb idea. You know, this time is coming partly because so many baby boomers like me are acknowledging the fact that, yeah, we are not only going to get old, we are old. Last thought, you know, we each have a cause that is dearest to us, whether it's bicycles, whether it's affordable housing, whether it's helping immigrants, and we all need to hold on to that. Where I hold out hope, and I'm trying to figure out how to do it tactically, and believe me, I've never done this before, so please make sure I have a card that I know where to reach you, or you know where to reach me if you have things to teach me, which I bet an awful lot of you do. That because age is the universal human experience, and ageism the form of discrimination we will all encounter, that we can come together around a table with that as our premise and talk about how do we end ageism from an intersectional perspective, and how can we each bring the cause that's dearest to us. For some reason, I envisioned it this week as a lunchbox. Like, you get to bring your lunchbox, and then there's the time where you open it up and you say, okay, you know, yes, I'm interested in ageism, but here's this other thing. Then how do we, you know, use the fact that we have come together to address all those things with their in their intersection with age, but also if we have come together at all ages around that table, we not only make that effort more effective for all the obvious reasons of synergy. You know, broadly speaking, older people have more time and more money. You know, broadly speaking, more younger people have more energy and more digital savvy. The synergies are obvious. If we can form those relationships across bicycles or the Keystone Pipeline or whatever the hell it is, we dismantle ageism in the process. Again, it's not binary. We don't have to choose. Bring your lunchbox. And to quote Muriel and the gentleman with the last question who said the same thing, Muriel said, you must keep working. And the last question, go do something.
Thank you. Okay. I'm going to hand this over to Isabel for the logistics part about just orienting everybody about where these conversation boards are. But I want to thank the panel. I have to say, it's incredibly inspirational. And it's moving for me to hear you say these things. People who've been here for my past and also our present and our future. You know, looking across here and seeing our newly hired people in here from Denver that just came in for the week to learn about Senior Planet and bring this to Colorado, and seeing people who have incredible history and stories and things to share. And I've learned some things tonight, and I'm looking forward to learning some more. So I want to thank you and tell you that I'm going to go out and fight like hell to make this stuff happen, and I'm glad you're with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
To echo Tom, thank you so much to our incredible panelists, to Ashton, to Tom for moderating. They've done an incredible job. So now we're going to be transitioning into our reception. We have beverages, some snacks. What I'd like to urge you to do is, as you go and get your foods and your refreshments, come back, wander over to the banner that has most called to you, that has most spoken to you. So you have technology, how has the digital age changed activism, in the back over here. Scorecard, living up to the promise of 1968 or not. Lessons, what is the most important thing I have learned as an activist? And aging, how can older adults be at the forefront of change? So please go get your beverages. Do keep in mind we are shifting the space, so chairs can be a little bit more opened up. So maybe just keep an eye on your coats, and they might be moving a little bit. Thank you so much.